So welcome everybody, and welcome to this People Analytics video podcast. I'm Julian Holmes, and I'm here with Celine Inge-Necheren, who's just finishing up at Aegon, but I'll let Celine introduce herself.
Yes, thanks, Julian. Hi, everyone. I'm Celine Inge-Necheren, currently the Global People Analytics Lead at Aegon, a Dutch insurance company, but indeed also on the move, and will start at ING, leading the People Analytics Consultancy chapter. So excited to move on, but also, of course, wrapping up my current responsibilities, and happy to share some of these experiences with you.
Great, really looking forward to it. So, like we said, we're not going to do all 7 topics today. Maybe just cover briefly the 3 topics you wanted to talk about.
Yeah. So I think first foremost, stakeholder engagement and a bit of sponsorship. How do you really get people analytics across the broader HR function and maybe even beyond? So I think that's a hot topic I also have some experience with. Then secondly, maybe we can look into a bit of the tech infrastructure for people analytics. How do you build your data, and how do you use it? And the third topic I think is very relevant is compliance and ethics, which is more about, of course, privacy, but also about our dear legal colleagues in the business.
Oh, that sounds awesome. So maybe start with the sort of stakeholder piece and sponsorship piece. I mean, clearly, people analytics, nobody has unlimited budget, so it's really important to get that engagement in the business. So what have you tried that's worked? What would be your advice to somebody you met in the lift, or somebody else thinking about people analytics?
Yeah, so of course there are many stakeholders for people analytics. I think if you look a bit within the people analytics community, there's a lot of talk about getting engagement with the C-suite in the broader sense. But I think it's a bit more than that. I think it's also about engaging your stakeholders in the other functions, also on the lower levels. So one of the things I did is within the broader people analytics community, I formed a community call, if you will, with all kinds of different disciplines. So I invited people from IT, from the legal side, from privacy, from data management. And this is how you get a very multidisciplinary group. And you can have the right conversations, because I think for each use case you have, there's different angles to it on how to approach it. And if you mirror this community also in a more executive way, so by some kind of steerco, you can easily have sort of like a flow through of your conversation to the decision makers. So that has worked very well for me in the past. Yeah.
No, that's really good, and I think it's interesting because often people talk about, shall we say, governance, and I think that's somehow bureaucratic, but actually what it's really about is getting those multi-functions, those multi-stakeholders together to have a conversation. So maybe perhaps something that you sort of, maybe some of the challenges you've had in the sort of sponsorship and stakeholder space.
Yeah, so many, of course, but I think one I see more often is that if you don't have the right momentum for your use case or your reporting or whatever it is that you're building, you might as well don't bother, because you have to connect it somehow with what it is that people are busy with. And this can be just very simply a monthly report. This can be something acute that happens. As an example, we had in the business a big divestment recently, where of course then everybody's focused on that. So if you then want to build a reporting solution, make sure it takes that topic into consideration and present it as centered around that topic. Then people will listen to you. But don't build standalone solutions that nobody is asking for. I think everybody makes that mistake once in a while. Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great, Celine. And I suppose, you know, where do you, what's sort of next in this space? I mean, what would you say? Obviously, you've done well taking this sort of more this governance and establishing these communities. What would be kind of the next step, perhaps, when you go onto your new role you might be trying?
Yeah. So I think next phase for me is really thinking about how can you really sell people analytics as a product almost. I think it's still a lot of a support function almost to the business, and I think it's a business by itself, right? You have to find your customer, you have to sell them your product, you have to find your business cases and really see it as a sort of like people analytics sales force, if you want to. So I think that's very much my next step where I want to go, and indeed, with a new challenge ahead, is that also my focus? Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. So maybe we'll move on, I think, to the technology of sort of space. So I'm sort of thinking now, particularly for those of us who worked in people analytics for a long time, you know, actually a big challenge around people analytics was assembling your sort of tool set and how you manage sort of data. So it'd be great to hear sort of things that you've done which have really worked and you would recommend to others.
Yeah, so I think of first and foremost, think about it. Think about what you need and what you really need, not what you want, because the wish list is long. So what are the essentials and what are the nice to haves? And then also think about it from multiple layers. So maybe you have a few key topics you need data on. Makes sense. Maybe on performance or on reward or on talent. And then break it down and really break it down to the level of what are your CDEs, what are your critical data elements? How do you build your data dictionary? What does it look like? How is it connected? What are your key points where you connect the different data sources? And design this, make a data model, think about what it should look like, and then take the next step and actually make it happen. I think we make the mistake of often just start running before we can walk, and just dive in, and then halfway through you discover that you forgot a certain data point and you have to start over again. So yeah, take it slow.
And maybe just double click on that a little bit. Are you finding, and maybe you've done a bit of both, is what's maybe been the blend between should we say a very intentional design around that data model and the technology needs to support that, and should we say something that's a bit iterative and kind of incremental?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be the one big design. What we did is approach it really sort of like data source per data source. So start with your key source. For us, that's Workday. I think for many companies it is, or SuccessFactors, or one of the big systems. And see what you have in there. Start with that. And then I think that's probably already maybe 50, 60, even 80% of your data. And then build on top of that with the additional sources is definitely an iterative approach I would take.
Yeah, great. And of course, you know, this isn't easy, right? There'll be challenges along the way. So what are the kind of problems that you've encountered, the things that make it perhaps a little bit more difficult than perhaps you might assume at the start?
So one of the biggest challenges in data, I think, is always the privacy concern. So especially with people data. And if you really look at your tech infrastructure, you have to deal with a lot of IT people because you're building tech infrastructure. But they don't necessarily know what it means to work with people data. They often don't really know the details of a concept like maybe privacy or PII, personal identifiable information, or what's the difference between sensitive data and maybe intranet data of your people. So take the time to have this conversation with your IT department and explain to them what it is that you're trying to do. And also, if you look, especially within Europe with the GDPR principles, things like data minimization, pseudonymization, hashing, all these principles you really have to talk through in detail and make sure they understand that before they start building. Yeah.
Excellent. So what's next in this space? What's kind of some of the developments you're seeing in the market, or maybe with other people you're working with?
Yeah, I think looking forward, I've recently been to a lot of people analytics conferences again, so I saw all the new gadgets. I think there is a rise of outsourcing, especially BI for people analytics, but also the advanced analytics. So there's more and more tooling and these packages. Yeah, it's not a one size fits all, but it's getting there, right? It's really a broad solution where you can, especially if you look at the reporting, can outsource it a lot easier than building it yourself, I think. And we see this, if you build yourself, there's so much effort going into sometimes the simplest visualization you want to build in Power BI or in Tableau takes you weeks just to fine tune. And you see all these parties, they have ready-made solutions that it's plug and play. So I think moving forward, more and more companies will definitely outsource at least their reporting needs and maybe a bit of advanced analytics, and especially for the smaller teams. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know whether you've come across this. Is do you find perhaps sometimes there's a bit of a tension between maybe an IT function that has a strategy that's based around, like say some generic data and visualization solutions,
Yeah,
wanting to build their own as opposed to some of these products? Is that something you've encountered?
yeah, definitely. And we even had within the company discussions on what solution that should be. So not even touching upon an external party. Yeah, I think that, again, it's about the difference between data and people data. I think a lot of standardized reporting solutions work well if you look at business reporting, and especially a lot of it is finance reporting, especially in financial industries. So is it impossible to use one solution for all? No, but I think you can have a smarter solution, especially if for a niche as people analytics, because also there's so many specific metrics in HR that are not applicable to the rest of the business at all. So yeah, use the expertise that's already out there, I would say.
No, that's great. That's really good. One of the things I used to say, I'm not sure if it's really true anymore, is I used to say that, the difference between sort of people and workforce data and business data is people and workforce data is kind of small data, actually, but it's very heterogeneous data. And because of the privacy and other things you've already mentioned, it has a lot more complexity. The materiality of it is much lower, the bar. Nobody really knows actually if like a sales report is out by like 0.25% or something, because of a cutoff error that gets corrected in the next period. HR data, yeah, everybody notices straight away, down to the person. So there's a lot less tolerance. Okay, so I think the third topic we were going to talk about today was compliance and ethics. And again, what have you tried that you would recommend to others and has worked for you?
Yeah, so compliance, and already talked a bit, of course, about the privacy topic. I think first and foremost, it starts with your old colleagues in the same company. And I see a lot of sort of like struggle between legal and privacy and analytics and HR. And a lot of these discussions escalate a bit and go back and forth with who's right. And nobody's right. You need to find a solution to a problem, and you both need to be in the room. So you might as well have a friendlier approach and try to appreciate the expertise that is across the table of you, because that's the case, I think. And also, do not try to explain your expertise to a data privacy officer, the same as that you don't want him to explain you all the privacy laws. So make sure you simplify your need. You ask what you need in a way that a child could understand, I always say, because that's the only way you can explain the problem and the solution you have for it. And in the end, what do you want from a DPO? Is you want a yes or a positive advice? Go ahead. I think the only way to get that is if you present your problem with the solution already at hand. So give them something they can say yes to, instead of, hey, I have this problem, can you help me figure out what to do? Never gonna work, never gonna work. So so yeah, make it simple, and really make it your purpose, that the other person understands what you're talking about.
And maybe just double click on that a little bit then. So is there sort of some suggestions? I mean, clearly everybody will have a different sort of risk profile in terms of how they manage people data, and
Yeah.
but are there some tips you could give people in terms of how you help the DPO, shall we say, help them make the right decisions?
Yeah. So a few tips is, especially focus on what it is that you want to solve and why that's a good thing. Because I think privacy often has this angle of risk or threat, or it's the danger in the data. And I think people analytics, you try to do good with the data. You try to help employees. You try to make it better for them. If you take an example like equal pay, for instance, you want to make it fair or fairer. And so it's a good thing if you want to use all the personal data, because you want to make it better. I think that's a key thing to get across. You're not the enemy. You want to make it better. And I think the second thing is connected to laws and regulations, because that's a language they understand. If you talk about, this is just a requirement, we need to have this insight, back to the indeed maybe equal pay, one of the ESG requirements that's coming up is pay gap reporting, of course. Yeah, you can calculate a flat pay gap and report that, but that's not good for any company, right? That doesn't give you any insight. It probably gives you a gap, and probably there's going to be many questions. So to make that better, you need to do the next step in the analysis. And to do the next step, you need more data, you need more model building, and need more insights. But if you explain it like this, if you say, hey, we have this requirement to report out on this number, but if we don't do anything else with it, it's going to be a very harsh reporting to do. So help us as a company to make this a better story, to make this explainable. And then they're likely to give in, right? Because it makes sense. You're making sense of the purpose. I think that's the main advice.
I think that's great, and I think it's really clever to also say that actually you might be aiming for compliance in this area, but that might result in us being non-compliant in another area. So we need to trade those things off. No, that's great, really, really helpful. And I guess I think inherently we would understand some of the sort of challenges, but maybe think about again, from a things that you might try differently, as you move on to your next role. Are there other kind of opportunities you think there might be to help advance this sort of compliance and ethics theme around people analytics?
Yeah. So I think one of the things is get a basic sense of a way of working across within the company. So get everybody together, and that's not only legal or privacy, but it's also data management, it's also IT, and talk about, okay, within people analytics, what is your governance? What is your way of working? How can you operate in a way that you don't have to call everyone every single time you want to do a new use case? Because it's tedious to think about, oh, want to do that analysis? Let's start now. Then we can start in 6 months with the analysis. So maybe you can think about what kind of blanket agreements can you make with certain data owners, or even with privacy. You can have some kind of ethics framework you use. You say, okay, we will never use data for so-and-so purposes, or another list of rules of engagement, so to say. And I think the key thing there is to also look at, if you know how you operate and you also advertise that a bit, so a bit back on the sales of people analytics, put it on your intranet page, or do something with it. then people understand what you're doing. It becomes transparent and you gain trust for what it is that you're doing. And I think trust is the key thing to do any type of analytics. So yeah, really make sure that it's clear what you're doing.
And presumably, just tying us back to the conversation we had about stakeholder and sponsors, there's an opportunity to use the community as part of that conversation and that debate, right? Of, you know, actually, these are the things we've agreed we can do and should do, and these are the things where straight away there's a bit of a, you know, an amber or a red flag here that this needs to be escalated, and we need to ask ourselves seriously.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And it can also be a very simple thing, but well explained. Huh? A simple thing to say, for instance, in all our reporting, we use a privacy threshold of, I don't know, 5 or 10 or 50, depending on what you're looking at. And it means doesn't matter which tool you open or which report you open, you will never be able to drill down to the person behind the data. It's a very simple thing, but it's very powerful because people get it. People get that protects the identity of people. So don't try to boil the ocean, right? It can be small things. Yeah.
Well, I think that's both great for that topic and also great for a general advice, I think, in the people analytics space. You know, don't try and boil the ocean, focused on the valley. Hey, Celine, thank you so much. I'm great for you to make time to speak with us this afternoon, and best of luck in your new role. And yeah, really look forward to hearing from you and working together going forward.
Thanks a lot, Julian. Happy to help.
Thank you, Celine.
Bye.